During his weekend campaign rally, Donald Trump made a kind of weird reference to a Swedish incident from the previous night. Let's watch.
So we're going to convene my top generals and give them a simple instruction. They will have 30 days to submit to the Oval Office a plan for soundly and quickly defeating ISIS. Here's the bottom line. We've got to keep our country safe. You look at what's happening. We've got to keep our country safe. You look at what's happening in Germany. You look at what's happening last night in Sweden. Sweden. Who would believe this? Sweden. They took in large numbers. They're having problems like they never thought possible. You look at what's happening in Brussels. You look at what's happening all over the world. Take a look at Nice.
I'm going to give him credit because most of those references he made were to real events that actually happened.
That's true.
So good job there. Very quick aside, I like the dehumanizing use of they took in large numbers. Of what? Of refugees, right? Mm-hmm. No, don't say that. Just say large numbers, okay? They packed things in there.
Yeah, he didn't even have to dehumanize them in that way. I mean, refugee has become like a four-letter word.
That's true.
In America, at least. And
yeah.
so calling them refugees wouldn't change anyone else's opinion about what's going on in the country and whether or not it's a good idea for other countries to take in large numbers of refugees. People have obviously already made up their mind, a lot of which many of which made up their mind based on false information.
My statement as to what's happening in Sweden was in reference to a story that was broadcast on Fox News concerning immigrants in Sweden, which I'm going to give him a little bit of credit. They did actually talk about that, and the way that he framed it was vague enough that he might not have thought that it was a terror attack. He might not have. I could go hard and say he listed it with Nice and Brussels and all of that. He's clearly talking about terror attacks, but let's give him the benefit of the doubt there. He goes on to say, give the public a break. The fake news media is trying to say that large-scale immigration in Sweden is working out just beautifully. Not. That's our president.
By the way, and that was
That's
it.
Our president.
Not. Like, he didn't explain himself. He didn't give statistics. He didn't give any real facts. Nothing. He just ended it with not.
Exactly.
You know, it would be like someone arguing, I don't know, that someone is unqualified for a job, and that person responding back with, yes, I am. I am qualified for the job. But, like, why?
Yeah.
Okay, but anyway, look, this story should alarm everyone in the country, not because it's a misstep, but because...
Yeah, I don't care too much about that.
Yeah. Think about the fact that we now have your average Fox News viewer who is severely misinformed running the country. And so, again, we have a regular Trump News viewer now running the country based on the misinformation that he sees on Fox News.
Exactly. And look, a lot of people, like we read a couple of tweets because it was funny, okay, that he mentioned Sweden. And this fits into a pattern from his administration where Kellyanne Conway talks about Bowling Green and Sean Spicer talks about Atlanta and a list of terror attacks when he says, I clearly meant Orlando, which I don't even think they're very close. And so I don't care about that much, just like Anna. But I do care about the substance, because it turns out that he was talking about something that Tucker Carlson was speaking with a documentarian, to give him more credit than he deserves, a guy who made a documentary about the supposed sharp rise in crime in Sweden because of recent immigrants, specifically Muslim immigrants. And so at the end of the day, just saying that Trump was wrong and there wasn't a terror attack in Sweden could leave people with the belief that, oh, there wasn't a terror attack, but there's terrible crime going on. And so that's the section we're going to turn to now, because it's not actually the case. And so government official from Sweden says this: last year there were approximately 50% more murders only in Orlando, Orange, in Florida, where Trump spoke the other day, than in all of Sweden. Bad. Now, what they're getting into there is the actual crime statistics, which you would think you'd care about if you were going to discuss this. But it turns out that the documentarian relied on testimony from a couple of cops, and we're going to turn to why that was problematic. And then Tucker Carlson didn't actually look into the numbers. He just accepted at face value what this right-wing provocateur making this documentary was saying. And so they had the quotes from the cops. And it seemed like the cops were saying that there was a lot of crime because of immigrants. But when you reach out to the cops, they say it was supposed to be about crime in high-risk areas with high crime rates. There wasn't any focus on migration or immigration. Goranson, who's one of the cops that was interviewed for the documentary, said they were answering completely different questions in the interview. He said, "This is bad journalism. It feels like hell. The real questions should be shown along with our answers. We don't own the rights to the film, but the end result is that we don't want to talk to journalists after this. We can't trust each other." And so the documentarian takes their answers to one question, links them up with different questions to give you a false impression of what's going on with Sweden. Now, a regular Fox viewer who sees that, okay, they're wrong about Sweden, they go off, they misinform people in their workplace or something like that. But as you said, it's a problem when the president has no higher standards than that, where he simply accepts what this guy says on Tucker Carlson and then immediately starts integrating it into his stump speeches without any additional research or verification.
If you look at the numbers, if you just spend 5 minutes and do a quick Google search and look at all of the charts and graphs related to the crime rates in Sweden, you'll see that it's misinformation times 100, okay? Let's get to that right now.
We're going to save them that Googling. We're going to do it for them, because it's one thing to show that the cops were taken out of context. Fox News on their front page had a Swedish cop that agrees with the documentary. But at the end of the day, if one cop agrees or two feel that they were lied to, those cops are not, reality is not up to them. You can actually find out what the crime rates are. And so let's bring up this first chart. Both of these charts have been compiled by Vox using publicly available information from Sweden. That shows, going back to 2005, the amount of immigration per year over a decade-long period. And that's a good amount of immigration that's going on. And in fact, it's rising as we get closer to recent years. And so you would expect, well, if we're integrating more and more immigrants, if they're responsible for crime, man, that crime must really be popping recently. Well, let's bring up a breakdown of different categories of crimes. You see there that some of them, in fact, are down from 2005. All the rest, maybe slight variations of less than half a percentage point per year, but largely stagnant, if not lower, including, by the way, the area of crime that they always talk about, which is the sexual crimes, the rape. They love to talk about rape, don't love to talk about the actual statistics.
Yeah, so let me elaborate on that a little further. So they do love to talk a lot about how, oh, these refugees are coming into the country and they're sexually assaulting and they're raping these women. First of all, in Sweden, the incidents of rape are really high, or they seem really high when you compare them to other countries, because in Sweden, they actually take rape seriously. They take sexual assault seriously. So they have a wider definition of what constitutes rape. So that's one thing to keep into consideration. Also, another thing to take into consideration is that it's not refugees who are committing these crimes. In fact, some of the studies indicate that about 1% of the crime in Sweden can be attributed to refugees. When it comes to sexual assault or rape, it's been a problem in the country because of their definition of what constitutes rape or sexual assault.
Exactly.
So these are all the nuances that people who are afraid of the others, who have been misled by the propaganda regarding refugees, won't really look into, because they've already made up their mind that these are dangerous individuals. But these are actually people who are trying to leave their country, the only country they've ever known, because they need safety. They want to save their family members. They want to provide a better opportunity, not just for themselves, but for their family members who might get slaughtered in their war-torn country.
Exactly. Yeah, and the most recent information, which isn't on that chart, shows that those crime rates are roughly at 2005 levels again. And so that comes after integrating hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of new immigrants into their society, and you see crime not raising, in fact, in some categories actually going lower. And so at the same time that Trump is trying to mislead you about what possible effect we would have as a country if we were to bring in more immigrants, this data shows that we might do just fine, but he's misleading you about that, so that should personally bother you. He's also taking Sweden, which is a very close, long-standing ally of the United States, and lying about them and their record, making them out to be effectively societally suicidal, if you will.
The fear-mongering about refugees is crazy, and if you care about the facts, you care about actual information that isn't skewed based on propaganda, do the research yourself. Don't even believe us if you don't want to believe us, right? I just want people in this day and age where fake news is an issue, right? Not the kind of fake news that Donald Trump talks about, but
which we call the news.
Right. You should be an advocate for yourself, and every time you hear any elected official, whether it's a Democrat or a Republican, claiming something that seems outrageous, look into it yourself, because you'll see what the reality is.
Yeah, I just want to briefly expand on, Anna pointed out some of the reasons that the sexual assault rate in Sweden seems higher. And it basically what it does is it is punishing them for being more liberal in this regard. So here's why it seems higher. As you pointed out, their definition is broader, like activities like having sex with someone while they're sleeping are counted as sexual assault, whereas in many countries, even in Europe, it's not counted as that. It makes a lot of sense that it should be, and so their numbers are just more accurate, really. And then also, they count each instance of sexual violence as a separate attack. And so if someone were to sexually assault, say, a kid hundreds of times, that would count as hundreds of attacks, which makes sense because it's hundreds of attacks, whereas in other countries it would count as one thing. And so they're being punished for being more true to reality. Yeah. It's like a business that chose to include tax in a listed price. That's the actual thing you're going to pay, but you're going to think that you're being charged more.
Yeah.
That's why companies have to lie to you, because they're at a comparative advantage. Countries, too, it turns out.
So, every once in a while you'll hear, public figures, whether it's a liberal or conservative public figure, asking why it is that some Muslim extremists, hate us. And then they'll immediately answer their own question and say, it's because of our freedom, right? It's because of the freedom here in the United States. Now, countries like Sweden, where the quality of life typically does better than the quality of life here in the United States. It's study after study. That's the kind of country where we should be applauding their freedom. Exactly, right? Yeah. I mean, we are the country that imprisons more people than any other country in the world. We are the country that apparently is now led by propaganda as opposed to real information and facts. We're the country that has politicians who pretend like they care about issues involving rape and sexual assault, but consistently vote against legislation like the Violence Against Women Act, consistently vote against legislation that would do away with prison rape or rape in the military. No. Sweden is an example of a society that actually works.
Yeah.
And so to sit here and pretend as if, they're so wrong and crime is terrible and it's just a horrible country is just so incredibly insulting, because there's actually a lot that we can learn from Sweden.
Yeah, and if you were watching the show last week, Anna did a story on the effect of Latin and Southern American immigrants being integrated into the U.S. and the effect on crime, right? And again, it showed that it didn't cause an explosion of crime or anything like that, and it could stimulate the economy. And there, we're talking about Sweden and from Mexico and South Latin America, very different contexts, different cultures, different history here domestically than in Sweden. But in both cases, it shows that this can be done without any problems for the host state. At some point, maybe people's beliefs about the world and about immigrants should change, but unfortunately, that's extremely slow to happen.
If you are a European man or woman, start training. Learn to defend yourself and your people. What are you going to say when your grandchildren are forced to walk around in a niqab and ask you what you did during the planned invasion of Europe? Say you avoided being called a racist? Wake the fuck up, speak up, do something.